Did humans create the gods, or did the gods create humans? A single question that shaped civilizations. For most of history, people answered without hesitation. The gods came first. Humans were shaped, taught, warned, punished, and saved by beings who existed before us. But in the modern world, that same idea transforms into something else. Not gods, visitors, engineers. Theories about advanced beings who arrived long ago, then left behind myths that became religions. One name appears again and again in these discussions: the Anunnaki. And today, we're going to explore the Anunnaki story in a way that's both cinematic and careful. We'll follow the trail through ancient Mesopotamia, the first great urban civilization we know of, then expand outward to Egypt, Anatolia, the Hittites, the Levant, and the early religious texts that shaped the world. But we'll also draw a hard line. What is genuinely in ancient sources? What historians broadly accept? And what is modern speculation? Because the Anunnaki story is powerful for one reason. Even if the aliens built humans idea is unproven, the questions it asks are real. Why did civilization accelerate so quickly in Mesopotamia? Why do so many cultures share sky beings narratives? And why do creation stories repeatedly describe humans as made for work, order, and obedience? Let's begin where the name originates: Mesopotamia, the land between the rivers. The world's first great cities rose here: Uruk, Ur, Nippur. Ziggurats stood like artificial mountains, stairways from earth to sky. And on clay tablets, pressed into wet earth with reed styluses, we see the earliest large-scale writing system, cuneiform. This is where we meet the Anunnaki. In the simplest, most grounded sense, the Anunnaki are a group of deities in Mesopotamian tradition, especially in Sumerian, Akkadian, Assyrian, and Babylonian contexts. Their roles shift across time and texts, which is normal for ancient religions. They are not described in the tablets as aliens. They are gods, often connected with authority, judgment, destiny, and the divine order of the cosmos. So where does the modern "they created humanity" idea come from? It comes from interpretation, especially of certain mythic narratives, and later reframings of those myths in modern popular culture. The most famous thread is the creation of humans as labor. In several Mesopotamian creation traditions, humans are created so that gods can be relieved of burdensome work, so order can be maintained, agriculture managed, temples supplied, and rituals performed. You can read that in two ways. 1. A mythic explanation for why humans must work, suffer, and serve society. 2. A literal-sounding narrative that, if you already believe in ancient engineering, feels like a blueprint. That second reading is where the Anunnaki engineered humans theory lives. But before we jump there, we have to understand something crucial. Ancient people did not separate religion from government or science the way modern people do. The gods were not only spiritual figures, they were the structure of reality. If your city depended on the river's timing, you worshipped the river gods. If your harvest depended on seasons, you revered the sky. If your king needed legitimacy, he ruled by divine mandate. So in a real sense, gods were a social technology, a way to coordinate huge populations under a shared story. And Mesopotamia was the first place we see this at massive scale. Now here's the part that makes everyone's eyebrows rise. Sumerian civilization feels like it arrives with astonishing complexity. Urban planning, irrigation, administration, mathematics, long-distance trade, legal structures, temples that functioned as economic centers. Is it possible this was simply human innovation accumulating fast? Yes. But it also triggers another question. Why do so many myths insist humans were taught by gods? Across the ancient world, we repeatedly see the same template. A divine or semi-divine figure arrives, brings knowledge, establishes laws, teaches agriculture, writing, astronomy, medicine, then either disappears or becomes a permanent object of worship. In Mesopotamia, gods are deeply involved in kingship and city order. In Egypt, knowledge is tied to divine principles like Ma'at, cosmic order. In Greek tradition, Prometheus brings fire and knowledge with consequences. In Mesoamerican myths, gods shape humans through trials and experiments. So is this evidence of literal visitors? Or is it a universal pattern of how humans explain breakthroughs? This is where a careful documentary becomes more interesting than a sensational one, because the alien engineer claim is not the only compelling angle. The more grounded mystery is this: humans across cultures used sky language for authority and origin. Why? Because the sky controls everything: weather, daylight, seasons, celestial navigation, time, fate. When you place ultimate authority somewhere unreachable, you make it unquestionable. And that brings us to a darker reading: power. If rulers are linked to the heavens, obedience becomes sacred. So, did the gods create humans? Or did humans create gods to create civilization? Now, let's move closer to the Anunnaki created humanity idea. Modern versions often focus on a narrative where humans are made by mixing divine essence with earthly material, sometimes described as clay. This is a powerful motif, but it isn't unique to Mesopotamia. Clay creation appears in multiple traditions because clay is literally what early agricultural civilizations worked with every day: bricks, pottery, building. Humans molded their world with clay, so they imagined themselves molded from it. But modern theorists read mixing divine essence with clay as genetic engineering. And here's the honest truth: there is no direct archaeological evidence of ancient genetic engineering. No machines, no lab artifacts, no verified non-human DNA signatures that can be traced to ancient intervention. So the literal claim remains speculation, but the myth structure is still worth exploring because it intersects with a bigger topic: the origin of religion. If you strip away modern labels, early religion often served four functions: explain the unknown, storms, disease, death; create social order, laws, morals, taboos; legitimize power, kingship, hierarchy; offer hope and meaning, afterlife, justice, purpose. Civilizations with complex systems needed shared narratives. That's why temples were not just spiritual places. They were economic engines, administrative hubs, and cultural centers. Now, expand outward from Mesopotamia. Let's go to Egypt. Egyptian religion is a universe of its own: gods, afterlife, cosmic balance. Pharaohs were divine intermediaries. The pyramids weren't only tombs, they were statements about cosmic order and eternity. And here, we meet a word that sparks endless internet arguments: Amen. In many modern conspiracy circles, Amen is linked to the Egyptian god Amun, or Amun-Ra, as if the word itself proves religious continuity or hidden control. Here's the careful, honest version. Amen in later religious usage is commonly understood as a liturgical affirmation meaning "so be it," with roots in Semitic languages. Amun is an Egyptian deity whose name and pronunciation vary across time. So the Amen, or Amun, proof of Egyptian control over later religion claim, is not a solid scholarly conclusion. But, this is important, the fact that people keep trying to link these things reveals something deeper. Religions don't appear in isolation. They evolve in regions where cultures overlap, conquer, trade, and absorb. So even if the Amen connection is overstated, the broader idea, cultural cross-pollination, is real. Now let's go to Anatolia. The Hittites. The Hittite Empire controlled major parts of Anatolia and engaged in intense diplomacy and warfare with Egypt and Mesopotamian powers. Hittite religion was famously syncretic: 1,000 gods, absorbing deities and rituals from neighboring cultures. This matters because it demonstrates how gods travel, not as spaceships, as politics. When empires expand, they import and export divine names, rituals, symbols, and myths. So when we see parallels between gods across regions, it doesn't require extraterrestrials. It can be explained by human networks, migration, war, trade, and marriage between royal houses. Now shift to the Levant and the early roots of later monotheistic traditions. The ancient Near East is a tangled ecosystem of ideas: creation narratives, floods, divine councils, sacred mountains, law codes, temple rituals. A flood story? It exists across multiple cultures, including Mesopotamian traditions, long before later texts took their final forms. Does that mean a global flood literally happened as described? Not necessarily, but it can point to regional catastrophic floods remembered and mythologized, like river floods, sea incursions, or climate events that shattered communities. And here's the key: myths preserve emotions better than details. Trauma becomes narrative. A flood becomes the flood. A king becomes the king. A war becomes a cosmic battle. So now, let's build the controversial bridge. If ancient myths are layered memories of real events, floods, collapses, migrations, could the sky gods be layered memories too? Possibly. But what could sky gods represent without aliens? Several grounded candidates: astronomical knowledge arriving from advanced centers to less developed ones. Elite priestly classes using sky symbolism to control calendars and society. Powerful foreigners interpreted as divine due to their technology or organization. A universal human cognitive pattern, attributing origins to above and unknown to beyond. Now, if you still want the one tick more conspiratorial version, without lying, we do it like this. We present it as a hypothesis, and we state the limits. Hypothesis: an advanced group, human or not, may have influenced early civilization, leaving behind myths that later hardened into religion. Evidence: myths about divine instruction, sudden complexity in early cities, widespread cross-cultural descent from the sky narratives. Limitations: no direct physical proof, and human cultural diffusion explains a lot. This is the responsible balance. Intriguing, but not deceptive. Now let's talk about the "they created humanity" claim directly. Modern versions often say, the Anunnaki came to Earth to mine resources. They created humans as a workforce by modifying existing hominids. Religions emerged as controlled narratives to manage these engineered humans. It's a story that feels like a science fiction mirror of old myths. But if we're honest, the strongest part of that story is psychological. Humans have always feared being used. Used by kings, used by empires, used by systems. So we tell stories where we were created to serve. That's not proof of engineering. That's proof of a recurring human experience, hierarchy. And yet, the myth remains eerie because it echoes the real structure of early societies. Large-scale labor systems existed. Massive building projects existed. Temples demanded offerings. Kings ruled by divine authority. So even without aliens, the created to serve feeling is not random. It reflects the world people lived in. Now, what about the claim that religions themselves were invented to control humanity? Again, it can be framed responsibly. Religion absolutely can function as social control. It can also function as social cohesion, moral framework, and existential comfort. It can be both. And the ancient world wasn't choosing between those options, they were intertwined. So when people say religion started as control, they're simplifying, but they're pointing at a real dynamic. Institutions shape belief, and belief shapes institutions. Now, return to the Anunnaki. If we ask, were they real creators? We get stuck. So instead, ask a better question. Why did ancient people describe creators as beings from above? Because above is where power appears. Thunder, lightning, eclipses, comets, drought, rain, the sun itself. A civilization without modern science experiences the sky as a living authority. So the gods descend from the sky the way storms descend from the sky. Now, let's build the final act of this documentary, the tension between myth and evidence. We can say with confidence, Mesopotamian texts do describe divine figures and creation narratives. Ancient civilizations did develop complex knowledge and systems early. Cross-cultural myth parallels exist, especially across connected regions. Religion evolved as a social, political, and existential structure. We cannot say with evidence the Anunnaki were extraterrestrials. They genetically engineered humans. Later religions are directly coded proof of their intervention. So if we want to end powerfully, we end with the truth that keeps people watching. The Anunnaki theory is not compelling because it's proven. It's compelling because it attacks a deep human uncertainty. We don't fully understand how civilization's first spark became a fire. We don't fully understand why myths echo across continents, and we don't fully understand how much knowledge has been lost through war, collapse, and time. So maybe the question isn't, did the Anunnaki create us? Maybe the real question is, if we could recover every lost tablet, every destroyed library, every buried archive, would our origin story look the same? Or would we discover that we've been living inside a simplified narrative, while the full story remains locked in the ancient world? Until then, the Anunnaki remain what they have always been, a mirror, reflecting our hunger for origins, our fear of control, and our suspicion that something important is missing. What if the greatest secret in history is not that we were created, but that we forgot what we once knew?